Welcome back to the NRG Oncology podcast for a new episode with Dr. Kirsten Bibbins-Domingo, the editor-in-chief of the Journal of the American Medical Association, also known as JAMA. In 2022, Dr. Bibbins-Domingo became the 17th editor-in-chief of JAMA. In addition to JAMA, she is a professor of epidemiology and biostatistics and also the Lee Goldman Endowed Professor of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. For many of us in academic medicine, a publication in JAMA would represent the pinnacle of our career. JAMA is one of the oldest medical journals in the world and was established by the American Medical Association in 1883. The prestige and publicity surrounding a JAMA publication is often a career-defining event. Given the number of practice-changing clinical trials with health policy implications being done at NRG Oncology, we wanted to bring Dr. Bibbins-Domingo on the podcast to give our listeners a sense of where our work might fit into the JAMA mix. Dr. Bibbins-Domingo, welcome to the NRG Oncology podcast. I wanted to start by asking, what is your mandate from the leadership of the American Medical Association, and how much work do you put into JAMA on a day-to-day basis to personally ensure the quality of the product?
First of all, let me say thank you very much, Dr. Chun, for having me on this podcast. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today and hope it's of interest to your listeners. So I became the editor-in-chief of JAMA and the network of 13 journals that are the JAMA Network in 2022. And at that time, I took a leave of absence from UCSF because this is a full-time job. So I am still a faculty member at UCSF. In fact, I showed up in resident clinic just yesterday, so I still see patients there with the residents, and I have a little small research group that's active there. But being the editor-in-chief of JAMA and the JAMA Network is a full-time job. So I am here in Chicago, where JAMA is based, on a full-time basis. What was the mandate? So I became the editor-in-chief 3 years ago. The mandate from the AMA is really for these 13 journals to publish high quality science that's important for the practice of medicine. And I think that's what they envision the journals to be. There is a firewall between the journals and the American Medical Association. We're mission aligned in that we think the practice of medicine is wonderful and the importance of science informing the practice of medicine is a critical mandate for both parts of the organization. And that's what I'm really proud to lead in JAMA and the JAMA Network.
And when you say firewall, I just want to clarify a little bit. I think I know what that means, but when you say firewall, that means you have complete editorial discretion over what comes out. And how is this firewall maintained?
That's exactly right. We're really proud that the AMA is our sponsor and support independent publishers as a publication. So the publications are not from the large commercial publishers. It really is from the American Medical Association. But my choice, the choice of our editors, choices of the content we publish, the types of viewpoints that we put around the content, the educational material, those are really all the choices that our editors make. And we make independent of any sort of decision or interests of the American Medical Association.
As I sort of mentioned earlier, I'm certainly of the opinion that having a publication in JAMA would represent a major academic honor, probably the pinnacle of a career. That being said, for high impact publications with policy or practice changing implications, there is some competition in this space. I think of journals like the New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, perhaps even the British Medical Journal. And I wanted to ask, what distinguishes JAMA from these journals, and how does the editorial board prioritize manuscripts for publication?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So, on the one hand, I would say, because I am myself a physician scientist, on the one hand, I would say we really benefit in the scholarly publications in the medical space from having really many high quality, outstanding journals. From the perspective of an author, you should probably be thinking, well, why would I choose one of these journals over another journal? Or from the perspective of a reader who gets to read everything, what would I find different in these? When I think about our niche, I certainly want to be publishing high quality clinical trials as well as observational studies. I am very focused on the audience that includes both those people who are conducting science themselves, but mostly I'm very focused on the audience of people who practice medicine. And I'm very focused on the global audience of people who practice medicine. So I would say what distinguishes our journals is we're going to publish that big trial. And then we're going to publish it with an editorial that explains that trial and what it means for how you might be practicing medicine, right? We tend to do more education around it. We might put some figure, use our fabulous graphics teams to really highlight some complex underlying biological mechanisms so that a clinician who wants to understand how a new drug is working, why a new approach to therapies might be different, can really help to visualize that. We might use our video team or our multimedia team or our podcasting team to go a little bit deeper. I think about what I want to reach is that clinician who might not be conducting the science themselves, but really wants to stay abreast of the latest developments, wants to really understand, well, what does this new trial mean for me? And I think that is where our niche is. The other thing I would say, we're a family of journals. And we have the opportunity in ways that few other journals do of working together. So, in your field, in oncology, we not only publish oncology at JAMA, we have a really outstanding journal in JAMA Oncology, and we're a small enough platform that we can work together. So, if you might see a trial that reports the primary clinical outcome and then a report of the patient reported outcomes, for example, and we might publish them simultaneous in our two journals, JAMA Oncology, and we're going to promote them as the package, right? So that a reader can say, oh, wow, that trial is telling me this, and I understand what that means for disease progression, and I also understand what it means from the patient perspective, and I can read that all as a package. And so we think that's a distinct advantage for authors who sometimes have multiple things they want to package together. We think it's an advantage for readers who might want to read not just, the main thing, but how it relates to something else. And so we're really fortunate as a family of journals, that a family that's not too big and not too small, but a family that works together pretty closely, that we can really use multiple of our journals to tell a full story that I think might be of interest to readers.
Yeah, on that note, I've been really pleased to see that NRG oncology trials have increasingly been published in JAMA Oncology, but over the years, I can really only think of a handful of NRG studies that have ultimately ended up in JAMA itself. One notable example is RTOGO236. This was a study that validated stereotactic radiotherapy for non-small cell lung cancer. But really, publications from NRG Oncology have been pretty few and far between. As NRG oncology investigators, I wonder if you could speak to our audience and talk to us about what we should be considering in whether to submit to JAMA when we have provocative clinical trial results, or are the oncology manuscripts being more relegated to, say, JAMA oncology? I wonder if you could just help guide our thought process in deciding whether to take our work to JAMA oncology or elsewhere.
So the first thing I would say when I became the editor in chief is that I was a little dismayed because I thought we should have more oncology at JAMA. Oncology is a huge field. It's an important field for the practice of medicine. When patients think about the broad spectrum of disease categories they're interested in, certainly oncology is high there. We don't have as much oncology as we would like. And so one of my priorities was to get more oncology in JAMA. I also think oncology is important because there's a lot of innovation in this area. There's a lot of innovation both in understanding new mechanisms of disease, understanding new therapeutics, but also in the conduct of trials, in the conduct of studies. And so for all of those reasons, there needs to be more oncology in JAMA. How did we decide to do that? Well, we already have a very good oncology journal in JAMA Oncology, and we have a very outstanding editor in Dr. Nora Desis. we wanted Nora, of course, to continue as the editor-in-chief of JAMA Oncology, but we decided we would pilot the idea of making her also an editor at JAMA. Now, on the one hand, you might say, oh, okay, now she's just going to relegate all my things to JAMA Oncology because that's the journal she's really in charge of. What I like about Nora is that she's a big thinker and understands the whole field of oncology. And so what she will often do is a paper might come to JAMA Oncology and she says, you know, a general audience needs to know about this result. It is a big enough result. It's a result that really changes the practice for care of this field. This should really go to JAMA. So she is known to kick papers at JAMA Oncology up to JAMA. And then, yes, she also kicks papers to JAMA Oncology. And I travel often with Nora, so I've heard her give her talk. And the way she thinks about this, which I think is exactly right, is that there are some findings that are important for even me, like a general internist, to know that now we have something different for how we care for patients with this particular cancer. And that needs to be in JAMA. Those are most likely to be larger phase 2 or phase 3 trials. They're more likely, if they're not trials and they're observational studies, they're more likely to be large observational studies. They're more likely to be on the cancers that affect more of the population, but not necessarily. We've also published some niche things. So we're really looking at those things that change practice, that are really have implications that me as a general internist, I also should at least know something about this, right? As opposed to JAMA Oncology, which really has an audience for oncologists, right? These are oncologists read this. This is really something that probably not everybody needs to know, but an oncologist should know this. That's going to go to JAMA Oncology. The nice thing is, Nora, she likes earlier phase studies. She likes studies that might be correlative, that looking at new mechanisms. She's willing to take risks on lots of things that are earlier. And so I don't think these two journals compete. I think what they do is they allow an author to have lots of opportunities to think about JAMA or JAMA Oncology. And then, as Nora also always points out, there's lots of oncology actually in lots of our journals across the network. The good thing for that is that an author doesn't lose. An author only wins here because we use the same platforms for communicating and publishing findings. And so even whether it's in JAMA, JAMA Oncology, or JAMA Network Open, for example, we're going to use that platform to communicate the science effectively to the broad audiences. For JAMA, it just usually needs to be something that everybody should know about.
That's really fascinating. I, of course, could imagine that manuscripts could be kicked down to JAMA Oncology, but I had no idea that actually some of those publications could be elevated to JAMA. On that note, as someone who's published actually a number of manuscripts for which I'm very grateful to the American Medical Association JAMA Network for, as someone who's published a few manuscripts in the JAMA journals like JAMA Oncology, JAMA Network Open, one of the big pain points, at least for me, and I am sure others experience with submitting manuscripts, are the ever increasing administrative requirements that are involved with the editorial and formatting process. Some of the journals, Journal of Clinical Oncology, at least in some of their submissions, have moved away from strict formatting requirements to reduce this burden on authors. But with JAMA journals, it's not uncommon actually to have over 100 queries from reviewers, editorial staff, which takes months and sometimes more months to address with no guarantee of acceptance. I wanted to just ask, why are there so many formatting and editorial requirements, even aside from the reviewer comments? And how in this process is JAMA balancing the need for a good product, academic rigor, with the competing interest of getting important medical knowledge published in a timely fashion?
Let me say, just as a preface to this, I've spent all of my career at UCSF as a physician scientist, and I had never been an editor before I went to JAMA. So my perspective on the work at JAMA is one of an author primarily. And so for me, all of the pain points that you're talking about are ones that are very familiar to me and ones that I was quite concerned that we had gone a little to the extreme in what we were requiring of authors. The intent behind all of these requirements is that, we want to publish with high fidelity and we want to make sure that we really have all of the elements that we are certain about when we put something out for publication. But the experience for authors, of course, is that you need a full-time person just to submit your manuscript for all the things that we're going to ask you on the technical side. And then when it goes out for review and comes back, you're going to have this big tome that just to go through all of that. And then you don't even know that if you went through all of that, you're going to get accepted, right? So that's not a great experience. And so my counsel to the team was, look, authors have choices and we have to compete on author experience as well. Our job is to find the best science and then publish it as efficiently as possible. We don't want to make mistakes. We don't want to cut corners, but we can be faster and we can provide a better author experience. And so that's what we have taken the time to do over the last 3 years. So I'm very proud, and I've just looked at all these reports, is we've basically substantially reduced our turnaround time. And that's the turnaround at time from submission to acceptance, as well as from acceptance to publication. And that is across all 13 journals. Our editors have heard the mandate, our teams have heard the mandate. And I think authors, if they had an experience that it took really long at our journals before, I would urge you to try our journals again, because all of our journal editors, all of our editorial teams have made substantial strides in making this a much more quick and efficient and hopefully easier process. So from the technical side, what I would say is that you're going to see more and more things where you're going to give us the title page with all your authors instead of entering all the author names. Like all of those things will become easier. Some because of new technology, AI makes a lot of this easier. We're testing a lot of things that front interface for authors it'll just be way easier. We still like the formatting process just because it helps us to make sure we know that we have all the elements of a complete manuscript. You, I'm sure, and your listeners, I'm sure, are always complete, but not all authors are. And so sometimes the requirements are like that. But I would say there's a lot in the new technologies that make it even easier for machines to parse things into categories so that you can give us something that is less structured. So you're going to see improvements immediately. You will already see some improvements for what your earlier experience might be with our journals, and you'll continue to see more and more over time. On the reviewer side, my counsel to my editors is I would like us to make decisions and give authors really what we want them to do to improve a manuscript with the goal of getting this accomplished in one round of revisions. So you're going to hear what we want. We would like an editor's note to tell you specifically what we want, what's the most important in those many pages of reviewer comments, so that you are clear when you're responding that you're not just going down the list of a million things, but you know what the editors think is the most important. And that's allowed us to be more efficient. We publish every year, we double the number of manuscripts we publish with meetings. We double the number of manuscripts we publish simultaneous. And the only way to do that is to just be efficient and clear with an author. These are the most important things to improve on your manuscript. This is what we need you to do. You do it. And if you do it effectively, we should be able to move to acceptance. We also do a lot more in-house now, which we used to not do as much of.
No, I think that's great. I heard a really funny story from Dr. Ralph Weichselbaum, how he submitted a manuscript, and with the first round of revisions, this was not to JAMA, but this was just to another journal. And with the first round of revisions, it came back with one reviewer wanting one thing, the other reviewer being okay with it. They made the changes of the first reviewer and they sent it out for a second round of reviews. And then the second reviewer got mad that they made the changes of the first reviewer. And so they ended up in this back and forth. And I think that's most welcome news that there's very clear expectations being set by the editors.
Yeah, I think the reality is about our editorial teams at JAMA is we're a very high touch set of journals. And I said, the reason we hire outstanding editors is that we want the inputs from the reviewers, we want the discussion at the manuscript meeting, everyone weigh in. But what we want to give back to the authors is this is the most important thing. These are the most important sets of things we need to see in order to make decision about publishing this manuscript. And then there are lots of other inputs from really good peer reviewers, right? So I don't want to dismiss peer review, and a lot of times they have that, but I think an author needs to understand how to prioritize, where to focus the most of their attention, and where there is some leeway. And in the end, we value peer review so much. But in the end, editors make decisions. And so we don't want you to be stuck with conflicting views of the reviewers without some guidance from the editors of what we think is the most important.
I wanted to shift topics a little bit and touch on some of the recent history of JAMA. One of the reasons why you are the editor-in-chief of JAMA is because the longtime editor-in-chief, Dr. Howard Bachner, stepped down in 2021 because of a controversial JAMA podcast that was released. I wonder if you could talk about what exactly happened in 2021 and how it changed the face of JAMA. I also wonder if you have any advice to Lauren and myself with the NRG Oncology podcast, as we are relatively new podcasters on the scene.
Well, I can't give you much more detail than what you already have because I was not part of the JAMA organization in 2021. As I said before, my experience has always been as an author and somebody trying to get into JAMA, but not as somebody who's been part of the team. Those events that you're talking about, I think they have been written about and discussed before. I think that there is the possibility in every journal for there to be concerns about process, concerns about content. That is a very humbling thing for every journal editor to think about because we make decisions every day that end up being very public decisions and open to scrutiny. And so I don't think that there was something specific that was happening at JAMA that was not something that every journal has to think about and make decisions about. I will say what I like is your second part of your question, which I think is a really important one. And that is for all of us who are using other forms of media to extend the reach of science for clinical practice, there's always the question of what that means. So if you ask me, we just talked about the standards for publication. We have very rigorous standards for how we publish trials and what the reporting requirements are and what the way we would communicate a result that has a p-value that's above 0.05 or things like that. In a podcast, what makes it interesting is that we don't have as many rules, right? We have a lot of, the way this podcast is going to be interesting, I assume, to your listeners is because we're having an unscripted conversation, right? That this is a conversation between you and I. We didn't formulate exactly what we were going to say at each point. It's sometimes then harder to think about how do you retain that element that's essential to a podcast. It's more free flowing. And how does that relate to other elements for us in a journal that are much more highly structured so that we can ensure the high fidelity and high integrity of the work? A decision we made was that for us, our podcasts are generally very much tied to our content. You're not going to hear podcasts on things that are not things that we published, right? We publish things that go through a process. We have an editorial process. We made a decision to publish this, not this. We made a decision to publish the conclusion this way, not this way. And we're going to have a podcast that then is tied to that content that can be very free flowing because we've already made a lot of decisions up front. You're not going to see podcasts from us that are not tied to something else we published. We're not going to have podcasts on just other topics. We have a high degree of checks and balances in our organization. We have lots of people on our team who are creative. We have lots of people on our team who know the medical content. We have people on our team who know the editorial process. We have a lot of layers to make sure that a lot of eyes are on things as they go out. But I think probably the most important thing is we just made some decisions about how do we use our multimedia It's about amplifying content that we already publish and make decisions on elsewhere. And then we have a lot of checks and balances to make sure everybody can weigh in. And then between those two things, we want people to have a relaxed time when they're on our podcast, whether you're an author or you're an expert we've invited for some other reason, to talk very freely.
As we come to the end of this podcast, I wanted to just ask in closing about the future of JAMA. JAMA is obviously a very different journal today than when it was launched in 1883. With JAMA now well into its second century, I just wanted to, in closing, ask what is your vision for the future of the journal, both in the near and the long term? And especially, how do the American NCI-sponsored cooperative groups like NRG Oncology fit into the ever-evolving story of JAMA?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Thank you very much. You know, when I think about what's important at this very dynamic time, we all get our information in very different ways. We're busy clinicians and scientists, and everyone's busy. And we're in an environment really of information overload also. So even though there's lots of cool stuff, you can't find it always. It's not that easy to do. I think in this day and age, journals like JAMA Network, and my commitment to JAMA and the JAMA Network is that we have to do the same things we've always done in with the structures we've always done, publishing high quality science with high fidelity in exactly the same ways that we have always done them. So in some ways that doesn't change. In other ways, we have to be wildly different than we've ever been before. We have to really embrace how we think about AI, how we think about the varying LLMs that people are using to get information. That's why we partnered with Open Evidence earlier this year, because we know that many clinicians are using Open Evidence, for example, as a tool, and we partner so our content is there. We're going to be thinking in new and different ways about how we amplify the content across varying channels globally. We're thinking about how we tell the story of the content in different ways. There's publishing the big oncology trial, and then there's telling the story of the sets of discoveries that led to where we are in this practice-changing trial. And we're doing this because people need to get information in a very modern way that we all get information. We're all on our phones. Hardly anybody reads a paper issue of anything anymore. We're all listening. That's why we have podcasts. We're all thinking about that. So to be a modern communication platform, we have to think like the other modern communication platforms. So the traditional work of journals, the way we've always done it, and then everything else sort of shifting to the way so that we can keep pace with the way people hear, see, read, understand information, which is a rapidly evolving and shifting way. For your particular oncology group, especially for the American oncologists, we're a global journal. What I would say is we would love to see your work in the JAMA Network. The way I think about why you should publish, because I know the best scientists, especially those involved in these cooperative groups, they want to do outstanding science and they want it to reach a clinical audience. They don't just want it to be published because they're putting it on their CV. They want it to change the practice, to change the way we care for patients. And that is really aligned with the mission of our journals. Everything that we do is not just you feeling like you can add a JAMA on your CV. It is you, because we know this authors care about this, you making sure that that work is read by the many people across the globe, is found by the many people across the globe because we're publishing with those channels, is explained to somebody who's a frontline oncologist who might want to know the bottom line, and the frontline general internist who wants to understand, oh, things are changing and how we think about this disease. And that is what we're going to give you at the JAMA Network. We know so much has been done to improve how we conduct collaborative trials. Oncology has been the model for how we think about the conduct of collaborative trials. And we, as a journal that cares about trials and the methodology and the innovation in trials, we know how to evaluate those trials. We want to see them in our journals because we think they're the model for how science should be conducted. And we'd love to see more from NRG Oncology, of course. And so I hope we can reach your audience through this podcast.
Dr. Bibbins-Domingo, I know you have a very busy schedule, and I wanted to thank you for taking the time to join us on the NRG Oncology podcast. I personally believe there will be substantial interest in this podcast and JAMA as a result, especially as we have several high-impact studies in the pipeline that have been recently presented at major scientific meetings.
Wonderful. Well, we hope anybody who's interested, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to Dr. Desis. You can find information on our website. We're very happy to talk with people about their interest in publishing in our journals.
Today, we had Dr. Kirsten Bibbins-Domingo on the NRG Oncology podcast, speaking about the past, the present, and the future of the Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA. The NRG Oncology Group is supported by grant funding for the National Cancer Institute, and content of this podcast does not necessarily reflect the official views of the National Institutes of Health. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and happy clinical trials.